I'm pleased to introduce our first speakers, Paul Gronke and Paul Manson. Dr. Paul Gronke is a professor of political science at Reed College and director of the Elections and Voting Information Center. Dr. Paul Manson is research director at the Elections and Voting Information Center and a professor in Portland State University's Center for Public Service. Together, Gronke and Manson run an annual survey of local election officials, providing critical information about the state of the elections field. Today, Drs. Gronke and Manson will speak about the results of their 2024 Local Election Official Survey, which provides new insights into election administration.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we're up, and we should have a clicker somewhere, and we should have a slide deck that should be on the screen, I think. Wonderful. Again, thank you very much. My name is Paul Gronke. I'm just a warm-up act here for Paul Manson, who is really the star of this show. As Rachel said already, we have been conducting the local election official survey since 2018. We have been working on these results, receiving these returns, and thanks, as always, to the election officials around the country who took time to respond to the survey, and thanks to the Bipartisan Policy Center. We're really honored to kick this off, and it is really wonderful to be back in this building and to see Hopkins and Neogora Institute revive what has been just a wonderful facility that many of us have spent many warm times with meeting with our colleagues. So I want to say a little bit about how this clicker works. So a little bit about the 2024 survey initiative and the work that we do. We've been doing this survey since 2018. This is the 6th survey that we've conducted. The survey was administered this year at Portland State University. Hold on a second here. There we go. Great. I want to acknowledge some partners that we included in the survey for this year for the first time, some of whom are here. Lisa Bryant is, can you stand up, Lisa? I want to acknowledge Lisa Bryant from California State University, Fresno, 2024 Andrew Carnegie Fellow. Lisa is working on a project called Polarizing the Process, Partisan Effects on Election Officials and Trust in Elections. Second team that we partnered with this year is out of the University of Florida. This is a 4-person team trying to identify solutions for government agencies to address unduly burdensome public records requests. The third group that partnered with us is out of the University of Missouri St. Louis, Professors Hugo Liao and David Kimball, a project titled Guardians Under the Pressure, examining the dynamics, challenges, empowerment, and turnover intentions among local election officials. And finally, the Election Reformers Network. This project designed to assess what extent election officials encounter ethically challenging situations or issues in their work. So if you're interested in contacting us about any of the work on the survey, we'd be excited to connect to you, put you on the list for the results when the full report comes out. But if you do have questions about some of the materials that these other teams have provided to us, we really would like to connect you to them to elevate their work. I want to acknowledge our supporters, funders for the 2024 survey, the Democracy Fund, and the Election Trust Initiative. And as I already referenced, the 2024 results will be released sometime early January 2025 at the website connected here. There'll be a QR code at the end. But if you want to know more about the survey and what we're finding, please get in touch with us. We'll be around here all day. And so, Professor Manson, I'm handing off to you.
All right, the fun part. So again, just to echo Paul's comment, a huge thanks to the over 650 election offices that took a survey from us during the election season. I appreciate that's a lift on its own. So the first part we want to start with is talking about threats and harassment and concerns around safety. So almost half of our respondents shared that they know of someone who left the profession due to fears of safety. And what we want to note here is that this really breaks out by the size of jurisdiction. And so for smaller jurisdictions serving less than 5,000, 10,000, this is less of a concern. It's when we get into the larger jurisdictions, 25,000 on up, and this is pretty stable across the sizes. This concern is persistent. Folks know people who are leaving, and this fear is real. Of those that we also surveyed, 14% themselves are thinking about leaving due to safety concerns. So very personal components here in terms of how they're experiencing engagement with the public and the types of information threats and that are coming across the transom. When we ask them to share their experience with these types of threats, over half share personal insults have happened in the past 2 years, personal harassment, another third, and then personal threats, about 15%. I guess thankfully, less than 1% share actual attacks happening. But what this means is we're also hearing that's changing how local election officials are engaging the public. We follow up this survey question asking how they've maybe changed their practices, and 30% are sharing that they're less likely to engage with the public. So this chilling effect from these threats and harassments is impacting the practice of election administration. And 42% have shared they change how they engage the public. To some of these changes, it's a security change or it's something that's more procedural, but nonetheless, these threats are making an impact on how elections are run and how these offices operate. In interviews that Paul and I have conducted with local election officials, we often have to pause that conversation. It gets emotional. Folks have really felt this impact personally, and it changes the type of work they can do and how they feel they can represent themselves in their community. Paul had mentioned we added this year questions about burdensome public records requests. We've heard this anecdotally. A lot of document requests are coming in. So this is the first time we've had a chance to nationally ask this question and test what we've been hearing anecdotally. So 3/4 are sharing that they have a lot of small document requests that are taking up all their time, and that it's impacting their duties. So what we've heard sort of anecdotally is coming out through the survey data. We then asked them what they would do to change this, and there's some policy recommendations here. I think what's an important takeaway here is local election officials aren't saying stop public records requests. That's a key part of democracy and transparency. They just want to have some structure around how that's handled. Try to channelize that flow of requests that are coming in and maybe prevent them from becoming a denial of service attack sort of event. We also asked this year if they were given a one sort of shot of money that would be long-term funding, something stable, what would they invest it in? And this is an interesting one because it breaks out differently based on the size of the jurisdiction. Across the board, if we don't break it out, we see pretty equal shares here, but buildings and facilities really pop out. If you look at these data and take out the smaller jurisdictions under 5,000, 10,000, 40% are asking for buildings or refurbishing buildings. So the physical space to administer elections is a huge priority. Staffing comes next. Now, when we look at those very small jurisdictions, under 10,000, they're asking for training. So they're not asking about buildings or staffing, they want training. So some very different requests coming based on the size and the nature of jurisdiction. And then another piece that we've been tracking over time is local election officials' own perceptions on how confident they are in the counting of votes nationally and in their state. And we had a momentary concern here a few years ago when that number dropped down closer to what the mass public reports. We're happy to report this year it rebounds back to where it was in 2020. And so showing confidence coming back among local election officials themselves as they look at these results in the nation. Finally, let me close with job satisfaction. This is always a fun question to ask. Local election officials are hard to tell the truth about how hard this work is. I always tell you this great job, they're doing good work. And so across the board, we hear 3/4 saying overall they have a high level of job satisfaction. They feel respected by their local government officials. The one piece I will just call out is in the bottom corner here. We ask if they would encourage their child to go into local election administration. 2 years ago, this was 41%. And so this year it's 22%. And so this is one of those questions that's meant to tease out a little bit more of an honest response. And we do see then some softening there in terms of the experience. So with that, I'll close. Feel free to contact Paul or I if you have any questions. I hope this helps with the panel discussion. And again, thank you to all the local election officials who participated in the survey.
Our next speaker has been a leading figure in the field of elections research for decades. Dr. Charles Stewart III is a distinguished professor of political science at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, where he has taught since 1985. Charles Stewart currently leads the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, where his team employs data-driven analysis to provide insights into election administration and the democratic process. Today, Dr. Stewart will be presenting the results of the 2024 survey on the performance of American elections, which surveyed voters on their experiences participating in elections this year. This talk will lead directly into a panel that Charles Stewart is also facilitating, titled Election 2024, The Experiences of Election Officials. Welcome, Charles.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everyone, for coming here today. Hopefully being the guy from MIT, I don't know how to operate this clicker. Oh, look at that. So as Rachel said, I'm going to be talking about the survey, the performance of American elections, also known as the SPAE. This is a survey that has gone into the field just about every federal election since 2008. The idea behind the SPAE was really inspired by the 2000 election and a lot of the popular sentiment and discussion around election administration that arose out of Florida and the events that followed from it. And the bottom line is that oftentimes we heard a couple of decades ago that the US was no more than a banana republic and that things were just kind of falling apart locally. And I and my colleagues decided to test this empirically. And that's the motivation behind this survey. We've, since 2008, asked a series of questions that are core to the survey about the experience of voters. I'll talk a little bit about that. Attitudes about policy and voter confidence and special topics. And in 2024, we asked about questions about perceptions of security at the polls, voter ID, and disruptions at the polls that voters might have observed. Now, this survey, what's distinct about this survey is the size of the respondent pool and the number per state. We talked to 200 registered voters in every state. That gives us an opportunity to say something about particular states, which we don't get in most national surveys that only talk to 1,000 people nationwide. And then we also have over 10,000 people nationwide, so we can say some precise things about national trends. That's what I'm going to focus on today. And then finally, the Election Trust Initiative this year is sponsoring us. And I'm thankful for that. And the people who will use the data later on, I'm sure are thankful for that as well. We'll be releasing the report and the data at the beginning of next year. So watch out for it. I should also say, by the way, that I got this data last night. The YouGov that does the survey for us said they would give me the data at the end of the day, and they're on the West Coast. So this is, as I say, the body's still warm. So just some survey highlights. So first of all, how did we vote in 2024? Here's the time series using both census data and SPAE data showing the percentage of voters who respond in the survey to the different modes that they use. And you can see up until 2018, there was a steady decline in election day voting and kind of an organic rise, slow to replace election day voting with voting by mail, voting in person before election day. You can see the disruption in 2020. Where for the first time in American history, the plurality of Americans voted by mail, and then a return to kind of normal, or at least a return to trend in 22 and now in 2024. But nonetheless, we are getting as a nation into a situation where nationwide, it's getting to be close to a third of voters voting on election day, voting before election in person and then by mail. Of course, this is the national trend. We can break this down by state. And where's Tammy? Where's Tammy? There she is. Here's your slide. The snow globe slide that breaks down states according to their mix. And I won't go into details because this is a lightning talk. It's not a molasses talk. So, but just note that if you're at the top of the triangle, everybody in your state is voting on election day by mail and early. And in 2016, most states were at the top. A few had kind of slid down the sides, indicating going to mail, emphasizing early in-person voting. In 2020, basically almost every state sunk down in the mail direction. And in 2024, it rebounded a bit. The important thing I want to note here, this is an opportunity for me to make one point about the workload of election officials. And that is that in 2016 and before, most states, and meaning most also local election officials, were running kind of 1.5 election. One election in which a lot of people participated, usually on election day, and the half election was kind of for everybody else, usually because they were out of town. Nowadays, in most of the country, most election officials are running 3 elections. And that multiplies, that doesn't just add, it multiplies the complexity of running these elections. And I think that's an important thing. Just to say that in 2020, Democrats predominated in voting by mail, Republicans predominated in voting in person. The decline in voting by mail is really a story of Democrats becoming more like Republicans over the last couple of years as patterns kind of return to a new type of normal. We ask a series of questions about satisfaction, and I won't go through this table, just to note that almost everybody who goes to vote in person, I could say similar things about voting by mail, have a great experience when they go to vote. It's easy to find the polling place, they check in easily, the machines work well, the staff run well, and they're confident that their vote was counted as intended. Lines were shorter in 2024 than in 2020, but quite honestly, we haven't returned back to 2016 following a quadrennium in which we tried to work on this issue. We still, voters are saying we have to get maybe back to this issue of moving them through the polling places quicker. Confidence. People are interested in this. Rachel mentioned it. Confidence in this survey expressed by confidence that your vote was counted as cast, confidence in the state's votes and nationwide vote. This is the percentage of respondents who said that they were either very or somewhat confident in this voting, and in the way voting went. And as you can see, we're at record highs. And so the voters felt good about the experience. Now, the reason why confidence is up, we've broken this by party, is that Republicans have become irrationally exuberant about the confidence of elections, especially at the national level. But I would also underscore the state level, where a lot of the issues that arise out of the lack of confidence really, really play out. Voters observe very few disruptions at polling places. The most common disruption that they noticed were people talking loud at the polling place. Fewer disruptions in early voting, and actually in general, voters reported a slightly better experience when they voted early in person than on election day. And I'm going to skip over, no, actually I'm not going to skip over that, because this is a point I also want to end on. So the Pauls ended on a high note. I'll end on maybe a challenge. And that has to do with communicating about what we're doing to secure the vote. We've asked voters in, I'm lying, in 2022, not 2020, and in 2024, whether the state that they live in does a variety of things, about a dozen different things to secure elections. These are summaries of those dozen things. And so don't worry that they were asked kind of stupid labels. But the important thing I would note is that when you ask voters, for instance, if election officials do logic and accuracy tests, only 39% say, yeah, that's something that's done in this state. And that's the security measure that most voters will agree is happening in their state. And these numbers have not moved very much in the last 2 years. And so I know election officials are working really hard on the communications bit. Those of us who are working with election officials to help to improve communications around here know that we all have our work cut out for us in continuing to communicate these points. So I will end there. I will, as I said, we'll be releasing a full report in the months to come. We'll be saying more at MedSol about the various topics here. And so thank you for your time. And I look forward to talking with y'all about these issues for the rest of the day. It's exciting to be here with people who are actually on the front lines. You've seen about 3 academics up front. We have the real deal here. So this is the opportunity to talk about the experiences in the 2024 election. I have with me 3 experienced state and local officials, or former officials who works with a lot of current officials. Karen Brinson Bell is Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. Amanda Gonzalez is the Clerk and Recorder in Jefferson County, Colorado. And then Carolina Lopez is the Executive Director of the Partnership for Large Election Jurisdictions, Pledge. We had one dropout. Scott Jarrett was originally gonna join this panel. He has a recount that he's in the middle of and about to head off to court apparently. No recounts on this panel, huh?
Oh, no, we have.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, so some people manage.
I just don't have to count them anymore. I can oversee the counting.
Exactly, letting other people do that work. So we've heard already from Paul, the Pauls, about election workers, election officials being largely satisfied with their jobs, but having really great challenges, which in some ways were greater in 24 than they were in 20, and 20 was no walk in the park, right? So there's this dichotomy of the experience of election officials. What you've heard from me is that voters personally found their own experience positive, and not experiencing conflict when they vote. So the lived experience with voters is a positive one, and yet the people behind the scenes, they oftentimes don't see the challenges. They don't see the paddling of the ducks below the surface of the water to make that happen. And so I think that's what sets up this discussion. The first question, I'm just going to go to the panelists, and maybe we'll start down at Amanda and come this way, is ask you all kind of what your hot take is from this election based on the experience that you went through and the colleagues who you interact with regularly. So I'll start at the end and move this way.
Yeah. And just for context, so I'm the clerk and recorder in Jefferson County, jurisdiction of about 600,000 people, 430,000 voters, just west of Denver. And I will say I am incredibly proud of how well this election was run. I think we were prepared for just about anything, and we were better prepared than we've ever been in the past. And I can also say that I would be saying that same line to you no matter the outcome of the election. And I think that is distinct from some of the people that say nasty things to me on Twitter, right? I think that, we aren't, I think we were all a little nervous about having a conference like this time of year, and that election, deniers, I'm going to use that word even though you don't love it, were never about free and fair and secure elections. They were about outcomes. And most of those folks got the outcomes they wanted. But no matter what, I would still be telling you today that I'm so proud and that we did a really great job.
Cool, great. Karen.
Well, there's a lot that I could focus on, but what I didn't expect to be focused on was recovering from a hurricane in the mountains of North Carolina. We are still going with our election. We have a statewide associate justice of our state Supreme Court that changed who the winner was through the provisional ballots. So that we'll go into that later, whether we resurrected deniers. And it's just right now it's as close as 734 votes. The Chief Justice just a few years ago was decided by 401. So we're getting kind of used to this, but we're heading into a sample hand-to-eye count. So we're not done with this election. But in all the preparation, and that would be my largest takeaway too, is we've had we did a lot to be ready. We've had a lot of turnover in North Carolina with our county directors, and so that put a lot of emphasis on preparing them to be ready for these elections or this election, but also educating the public in response to some of the skepticism and so forth. And so that's been an ongoing effort really beyond 2020. We started that even earlier. But a lot of our efforts were to prepare for the unknown. And we did not know that we would be faced with 25 disaster declared counties out of our 100, and that it would be the mountains of North Carolina that I had called home for 20 years of my life. And so it was very personal for me and for the people that I work with, and that we would have just this incredible journey and effort to ensure that every eligible voter would be able to cast their vote. When Helene hit, we couldn't even have communication with 14 of our county offices to know that they were okay. And by the time Election Day came around, we had nearly every early voting site open, nearly every Election Day site open, and there were roads leading into even the most isolated communities. And all of that happened in 35 days. And it's a testament not only to the election officials' preparation, but that working partnership that we did not, bring together overnight. Our state emergency management, our National Guard, our CISA folks are integrated in our processes and have been for a long time. And so we didn't know that it was going to be Hurricane Helene in the mountains of North Carolina. We knew it would be something, and we had prepared for that. And so when push came to shove, we pretty seamlessly rolled right into the efforts that we need to do, whether it was a hurricane, a natural disaster of some other sort, other threats that we've prepared for. We just, this time it happened to be a hurricane and flooding in the mountains of North Carolina.
Kenan?
So my hot take is, over the last couple of years, we've been hearing AI in elections, dun, 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 ominous music cueing. And what I actually saw was with very limited budgets across the country, right, and very limited staffing, if they were able to backfill the vacancies, our election officials sort of resorted to what else is possible. And AI, artificial intelligence, and systemic programs to help plan better, to help respond better, really helped deliver fast results, right? Like our nation, regardless of party affiliation, will tell you the election was a success. We had election results on Tuesday night, regardless of what happened behind the scenes, regardless of recounts or court filings. But as it relates to artificial intelligence, like there's your colleague in Denver, he has a tool where he could automatically communicate with the voters and members of the community in 82 languages, real time. And other county offices outside of election have adopted that to provide better services. That's sustainable, and by the way, very minimal investment. You have individuals like Broward County, Florida, who piloted not one, but 2 AI chatbots. One for the voters, because most people are not available to call 8 to 5, right? They have real jobs and real responsibilities, and by the time you get to reading your email at 1:23 in the morning, the elections office is closed. And having this, engagement with the community really helped in his community combat mis and disinformation, just provide better service, and particularly if there was like a last-minute polling place change. And he did it again with his poll workers. We train poll workers, and we put our reputations on the line for a number of volunteer people that show up. And well, you hope that they show up to work, and you hope that they've retained everything you've shown them. But having this AI tool where they could just ask very simple questions really helped reduce the wait time to get to a live body if your question was a little bit more in depth. So that's my hot take. AI in elections, it actually works.
Cool. Well, we'll come back to that. So I'd like to kind of stick on these themes for just a second, and coming back to Amanda. Actually, there's something you didn't mention, but I think folks in the room may be interested in hearing about a password breach in Colorado, and which was kind of sensational, and it was all over the news. But it also kind of gives insights into kind of what happens at the county level as well in terms of security around the state. Can you say a bit about that
Yeah, absolutely.
experience?
And I actually want to back up a little bit from there because I think that anytime you have a failure of a piece of security, which you never want to have, but in any human-run process, it's a possibility, right? Things might happen. And so much of what made that not an acute emergency in Jefferson County was the work that we had done in the lead up to the election. So when I was elected in 2022, we did a couple things. We created full-time outreach staff. I think one of the slides from earlier today talked about how threats and harassment have made some election administrators engage with the public differently, and maybe in some cases back off. And we actually did the opposite. We doubled down and we invited people in. If you sent a mean email, as long as you weren't making threats, if you're making threats, I don't want to be your friend. But if you sent a mean email, we sent you back an explanation and also said, hey, by the way, we offer tours. If you want to see this process for yourself, come on in, right? Because it's really hard to see the process and still have doubts. We hired this full-time engagement person, and so we were out where voters are. We were at laundromats and dispensaries and schools, right? All of these places where maybe you don't expect to hear about voting, but where normal people might be, right? And then we also created an advisory committee where we asked members of the public, we have about 40 people, the youngest member is 15, the oldest is in their 70s, saying, give us feedback, let us know how to reach your community. So then when something unplanned happened, right? When we had our Secretary of State's office inadvertently had some BIOS passwords to computers that were posted online that we were unaware of. When that happened, it made it that much easier to then reach out to the public who we'd already built relationships with to say, here's what happened, here's why it's still secure, right? You have layers of security so that if one is breached, the others still work as they are supposed to. And we were able to effectively communicate that using relationships that we already had, which I think was incredibly important to assuring the public that their elections were still safe, secure, they could vote, and it was business as normal.
Right. So, I mean, that's a theme that I've heard from a couple of y'all already. I always like to say before an election that kind of remind the public that something's going to happen in this election. We just don't know what it is, right? And that's really been the history of elections, certainly for the 2 decades I've been paying close attention to. And kind of preparation for anything to happen gives rise to the ability to respond to the unexpected. Karen, I'm curious about in North Carolina, certainly there was a lot of attention within North Carolina on kind of getting those mountain counties back up and running. So did the low-level counties, did they feel kind of neglected? Like, man, we're not going to get any help here? So I'm talking about the rest of the state,
right.
and,
Yeah.
right? In the context.
And you and I chatted about that, so
Yeah.
I'm glad you're bringing it up. So I think this idea of preparation. We started in 2020 doing what we call huddles, and these are every other week virtual meetings with all 100 counties, with some sort of training topic or some sort of guest speaker. I'm looking at Jennifer Morrell. Elections group has come in and they've talked about various things with our folks. Sometimes it's in-house training on processes and things to make sure everybody's up to speed. We felt the need to do that in 2020, obviously because of the pandemic, but we never stopped it because since 2019, we've seen more than 2/3 of our counties have a change in county election directors. Going into this presidential election, we had 34, I think it was, people who had maybe worked in elections but never been the director. So we kept that going. We kept our Monday morning kickoffs. So 5 weeks out from the election, we bring them together for a stand-up each Monday morning of what's the hot item of the week? What do they need to most be prepared for in the big scheme of things? And we continue that through elections. So that was still in place. We had our field specialists, not as many as we had in 2020, thanks to cuts from our legislature, but we won't go there. So yeah, we did this with fewer people, but we kept it going. And so I think, what I noticed is that because this had been ongoing, we've never stopped since 2020 with these huddles and with these extra efforts. We had the emphasis there, we had the preparation there, and so when we had to pivot and put so much attention to the mountain counties, I equated it in one of our gatherings of, we've got a down player on the field, and we've got to all step in and be even better out in our roles on that field while we give focus and respect to those who need our help the most. And so that's what we found is that because we had done so much efforts in advance, we still were supporting them, but we didn't have to necessarily put our attention to the 75 other counties. We could give that extra effort to the 25 counties. And the thing is that those other 75 desperately wanted to be able to help. And so, there were ways that they did. Even some went in and helped on the weekends in those disaster-affected counties and did what they could while still trying to keep their elections going. So, it's amazing. We've really emphasized in North Carolina that we're a team. And we all know in elections, I mean, it's not just in our state. What happens in Colorado affects the rest of us in the nation. So it's important that we gather like this and support each other and learn from each other and learn how our different processes work so that when they question, is it really, on the up and up in Colorado? Yes, I can say yes. And so, but the same thing trickles down with our counties. And so we've really solidified ourselves as Team 101. We say it all the time. We hashtag it, 100 county boards of elections and one state board working together. And that Helene just amplified that. We thought that, the easy was the coronavirus at this point.
Yeah, and you raised something that's important. I think that folks outside of the elections world don't always grasp it. That it really is a community of people kind of have a shared fate, and it's easy to imagine kind of getting on the phone because it's been a hard day and kind of commiserating. But there's also just kind of the practical experience. There's a community in North Carolina, in Colorado, wherever, of others who know how to do this business. And when crises strike, when machines break down, you can oftentimes count on somebody to kind of come in and help out, which is really, to me as an outsider, been one of the great learnings in my work. So Carolina, you mentioned AI, and being at MIT, a lot of people talk about AI, and oftentimes I go to conferences and meetings where the conclusion is AI kind of a nothing burger so far, right? It's thing, as you said, dum 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 dum. We're worried about AI. And it sounds like some of your people you work with have figured this thing out. Now, did they just kind of go to ChatGPT and say, write me an app, please, Mr. AI, and help this out? So if an election official watching this or somebody in the audience wanted to pursue AI as a tool in their own work, what have you observed in terms of getting into that world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that I absolutely love to do. If you've ever walked into the LA County Operations Center, it is a wall full of TVs, from traffic patterns to predictive turnout, so that way you can adjust staffing. If there's something, who's heard of like traffic in LA, right? Like that's never happened. But if there should be some adjustments to traffic, how they sort of like move their pieces, their people, their equipment, more additional resources, right? And so the very first thing I would say, if anybody's interested in learning more about AI, consider talking to someone who does that, right? So you can attend an election center workshop. You can join the Partnership for Large Election Jurisdictions. We are essentially like a super connector. And so if I was interested in doing an AI chatbot, I would immediately connect you to Broward County. And they would share very quickly because they want to be of help. They want to be not the only ones using this great technology. They would tell you the vendor. They would tell you, hey, this, first version didn't work so well. Save yourself a step. Do A, B, and C. And that's what I love about this community. We don't steal elections. We do copy and paste in this community. If you have a great checklist or a great procedure, we are very happy to share. So that way you can work on something else because, as you know, there's never enough time. There's never enough resources. There's always an election, whether it's a special election or if you are like in Florida, my home state, where you do not have centralized elections. So if it's Tuesday, it's election day somewhere in Florida, and many other states across the country. So ask your peers. Go see them. Go see it in action. Go see them while they're actually administering and see what you like, what you don't like, what you would do differently in your jurisdiction. And then the conversation, I think, in 25, 26 will be, well, what else is possible? We used it to reduce our wait times on the phone. How can we do it now when the legislature has cut our budgets, or when my super stellar, super smart number 2 just retired after 35 years. And I have 3 more deputies that all started at the same time, went up the ranks, and they're also gonna retire in the next 2 years because they're in their job, right? Like, how do you backfill and improve? Because you're only as good as the last election that you did. So have the conversation, ask, and observe, right?
Great, thanks. So to kind of shift gears a little bit, but also then to kind of come back, I warned the panelists that they're going to have to pay attention to the Pauls because I'll quiz them on some things. And so being the professor, that's what I do. But I'm curious, I would like you all to kind of fill out some of the points that the Pauls made. And where I'll start is with resources. You heard the Pauls, talk about the question they asked of election officials. If a bag of money fell from the sky, I think that's how you worded it. If a bag of money fell from the sky, a really big bag of money, how would you spend this money? From your perspectives, can you kind of flesh out how you see the big needs that money could bring to the elections that y'all run? And rather than starting at the ends, I'll start with Karen and start with her.
Well, our resources, I think we're all worried about where our resources are going to come from. Will we still see HAVA funding? Will we still see Homeland Security grant funds? Things that really have been, those are our only sources to deal with cybersecurity in a lot of ways. For example, those are necessary to have new and modern or most current voting equipment for a lot of the jurisdictions. And so, as I mentioned, we did not, our legislature was very purposeful in how they authorized our HAVA funds. We did not have the wherewithal to make those decisions. And so we found ourselves with fewer people resources and are stretched. Some of the counties are in the same boat. I did find the fact that the question led to buildings. When I was a county elections director, actually the last night before I resigned from my position, I got the authorization for a new facility. And it was one of the largest investments the county had made in refurbishing a facility and providing that to the elections office. It changed the operations completely. It is so efficient because we stopped focusing on a clerical operation and into a logistical operation. And I think that is likely, there is the physical security concern that we're all faced with now, but a lot of the logistical aspects feed into physical security too. And so I'm not surprised to see that, because there are still many jurisdictions that are behind the 8 ball on recognizing that this is not about typewriters and filing cabinets any longer, and how to provide the technology and the building infrastructure that's necessary to have well-run elections. I also, your snow globe highlights that North Carolina is continuing to move towards more early voting, and with that, there's also a building need, and how do you shorten the lines by having better space, better parking, better things of that nature, which we really somehow came up with a great formula during the pandemic, and it's been carried over into this election and will be for future elections, but helping others have those facilities. I'm not surprised that that was in the survey results, even though we know we still need the resources of people and the training and the salaries and things. But here again, to Rachel's opening remarks, we sacrifice. We'll get a new building if it means we still don't get a pay raise, just so that we can do our jobs better.
Amanda?
Very much echo that pay raise. Many of our election workers our full-time election workers, don't actually make a living wage in Jefferson County. And I think that that is real and something that we need to be paying attention to. And then when I also think about innovation, how do you create the space to innovate? You talked about the use of AI, which is something that we are using. We have been using a multilingual chatbot for multiple years now. And one of the pieces of feedback I got was like, well, now our election judges are bored. I was like, okay, great. We can, I have things for them to do. Right? But there are so many things that I think we can creatively think about. How do we do this in both a more efficient and more inclusive way? But you have to be able to have the space outside of your daily operations to dedicate to researching and implementing those innovations. And so when I think about miracle money, I think about how do we compensate our election workers in a fair way so that they stick around and so that we have that expertise. And then also, how do we create the space to innovate and invest in technology?
Carolina?
I'm going to resonate and say that you probably asked for that building for years before you got it. A little bit.
A little bit.
And I'm only saying that because it takes time, right? If you want something today, you requested it 5 years ago, then you were denied. 4 years ago, then you were denied. Then you chased the budget person through County Hall, and then they finally gave you some, but not everything you asked for. And that's just the reality, right? So I will say that leaning into, if there was like a magical pot of money that arrived in this building right now, I would work with like the trusted election officials and the research community and figure out, well, they have this magical formula in North Carolina. How do we right size it so that folks in Colorado and Idaho and Iowa, and I don't care how big your jurisdiction is, you could right size the outputs. If I have 5,000 or 5 million voters and I want an aspirational wait time of 30 minutes or less, what do I need to do to adjust the workflow? And so I would invest all of that money in how to make them work better so they don't have to work 20 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, burn out, and have to train new people. So that's what I would do.
Okay.
Charles,
Yeah, please.
Amanda made me
have a
think
layer
of something.
too.
I mean, we're having a difficulty being innovative and putting in new practices because our laws keep changing. Our laws just came, a 131-page disaster relief bill is going to change the amount of time that we have to process absentees and provisional ballots in North Carolina. And create potentially the need to work 24-hour shifts, and I'm not exaggerating, in order to accomplish it. How do we focus on doing new things, or even having the time to walk county buildings or meet with the county manager, walk those halls to get new facilities when you're just trying to figure out how to not sink?
Or get sued.
Yeah, well, we get sued. That's a given.
There is no avoiding getting sued.
Yeah,
It's North Carolina. We just wait for the lawsuit.
Well, and I think on that note, with the keeping up, I very much agree. I had a couple staff members who worked 27 days straight without a day off. in October and November. But also when I think about, the information requests that we're all dealing with that change when the laws change, I am a firm believer that the public should have access to information and that, open records requests are not inherently bad things. And, I have one PIO, and it is actually a political appointee because we didn't have one, so I used one of my appointees for this role. By contrast, our sheriff's office has 8. And so when we're looking at our ability to keep up with legislation and make sure that the public is getting the information that they deserve, making sure that we have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, and this brings to mind, Wendy Underhill has heard this a lot from me when I've talked to her constituents, that I've observed that in the state legislatures and in the public, there's this disease that I call "how hard could it be"ism, that really kind of is behind a lot of these. We'll just count faster, right? And just how hard can it be to count a piece of paper? We do that all the time, and communicating with legislators and others about how hard it actually is an important part about the resources, for sure. You look like you're about to.
I was going to say, can I say something about just the speed at which our election officials responded to any issue that happened before, during, and after Election Day? I think about, Oregon and Washington. They had, some attempts at tampering with mail ballots. Within an hour, these election officials that have been working for 35 or 135 or maybe 4 years straight, because they haven't got a break since 2020, they responded very quickly to the media. This happened. This is what we're doing. If you've been impacted, this is what you can do. If you feel like you don't know if you've been impacted, this is what you can do. And so it became like a nothing burger, right? Like there was media coverage, but everybody felt like they had what they needed. Or when there was potential bomb threats in Georgia on Election Day and many other places, these election officials, they leaned in on crisis communications. And that goes back to what you were saying about, Team 101, right? So many tabletop exercise, so much preparation. I heard in 2022, oh my God, all this planning and nothing happened.
The insurance policy. That's what we want.
Nothing happened because all these people, in addition to your everyday job, answering the emails, meeting with folks, after work, you would try to figure out how to structure, how to strengthen your building, how to, make sure that your staff felt safe and was safe, how do your voters felt safe. But the amount of time they spent on communication, like I think of Bob Page in Orange County, California. Every day, if you just follow his LinkedIn during break, just go see, there are high definition videos telling you, and this is what we're doing today. And this was a count before, and this is a count after, right? And so there was very little ambiguity as to like what was happening in the building. Mm-hmm. And so that maybe has helped with some of the voter appeal, right? Voter understanding of the process.
Yeah, great. So another topic, this is not necessarily to the Pauls, it is a bit to the Pauls, but it has to do with skepticism or denialism. And to kind of bring up a topic that I think the public may quickly forget about. And it's been remarked already that the outcome of the election lowered the temperature nationwide, but it didn't freeze it, right? And so for those of you on the ground, can you talk about how election skepticism, what it looks like now, and what are we missing in quotes, when we don't see kind of the type of violent skepticism and denialism that we saw 4 years ago? Kind of what's it like on the ground right now? Anyone want to start?
Well, we're dealing with it right now. I thought that when the election was very decisive on election night, that we were going to just be able to methodically do our process through the canvass period, at the county level, report it up to the state level, all would be good. I never thought I would have to go toe-to-toe with the president of our Senate, the president pro tem of our Senate, probably the most powerful man in North Carolina government. And he came out after we had counted the votes, made it very clear election results are unofficial on election night. We have provisionals to deal with. We have a report that we put out the day after so that people know how many provisionals we were going to be dealing with, which was over 60,000 and almost 70,000, and had a lot to do with changes in voter ID laws in North Carolina. We were very clear. Our North Carolina laws allow for military and overseas ballots to be counted up till 9 days after the election, that there were going to be ballots to be counted. We have never hidden this. This is North Carolina's law for a long time. This is nothing new. We were out in front of the media talking about it. And yet, here is this senator coming forward and saying that we were going to count ballots until the person we wanted to win won. And that's how partisan the North Carolina State Board of Elections is. And I had to step out and say, sir, you are trying to incite violence. You know the truth. Tell the truth and be a leader. He technically has never responded. He spoke to the media some this week and said he was just conveying what he heard from the public. No, that was exactly my point, sir. You have a responsibility to tell the public what you know is how we run elections in North Carolina, how we adhere to the law, and not to try to incite violence. This election, yes, it changed in this state associate chief Supreme Court contest, and it's because of provisional ballots that were counted according to law. We've completed a machine recount. We are now in a hand-to-eye recount for 3% of the ballots, and may have to go to a full hand count. And yet, he still is contending that we are trying to count the votes until the person we want to win wins, and that is just not so. And we are seeing it out on social media. I do worry. I put that in the letter to him as well, because he has a bigger microphone than I will ever have. But I had to speak out and let it be known that this is not okay. And and just because the other contests turned out the way that he wanted and not this one, doesn't mean that he can attack the very foundations of elections and election officials who are conducting elections according to law. Yeah. Sorry, a little passionate.
Yeah. And the irony in having to do with provisionals is that I remember back in 2002 when HAVA was passed, North Carolina was the poster child for the requirement that everybody have provisionals. So you all have a lot of experience with this, and nonetheless, right? Nonetheless.
You're passionate because it has real consequences, right? That these things are not said in a bubble, but they are inspirational to certain kind of people. I also think that our staff know how important this work is, right? Our voting is the foundation of all other rights, and we take that responsibility incredibly seriously. And so when you're getting dozens or hundreds of emails or comments on your social media saying, you're a liar, you're horrible, you're screwing it up, right? Our staff feel that, right? And they want to do a good job. That is their whole goal. And so I think when you have people with political power who are saying those criticisms in such a loud and misinformed way, right? It has consequences. And I think one of the slides that was up earlier talked about, 51% of people had gotten online harassment or something like that. And one of my first thoughts was, do we have gender disaggregated data for that? Because I think that number might be slightly different for some of my female colleagues than it would be for some of my male colleagues. Because that number felt incredibly low to me.
I'm going to use the prerogative because we're down to 14, 13, 12 seconds. But if okay, can I, for the last word, the 20-second take from everybody before we sign off. I'll start with Carolina.
Election officials knocked it out of the park, and we need to support them so they continue to do that.
Karen.
Ditto. I'll make it short.
We're a team and we got this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.